Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is an innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. With me, I have Judith Valente and Brother Paul Quenon. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host today. They are the authors of How to Be a Monk and a Journalist Reflect on Living and Dying, Purpose of Prayer, Forgiveness, and Friendship. Dr. Paul Quenon entered the Trappist Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky in 1958 at the age of 17, where Thomas Merton was his novice master and spiritual director. He sleeps under the stars each night and is an avid hiker and hill climber. Brother Paul is the author of award-winning book, In Praise of the Useless Life, a monk's memoir, praised by Sue Monk, Kid Pico Iver, and Kathleen Norris. As well, he co-authored with Judith Valente the Art of Pausing, Meditations for the Overworked and Overwhelmed, the author of 9 collections of poetry, including Unquiet, Vigil, New and Selected Poems, Bells of the Hours, and Laughter, My Purgatory. His book of photographs and poems, See the Moment, Feel the Moment, is due in 2021. Brother Paul is sought after, inspired speaker, is a frequent guest on podcasts. Judy Valente has twice been a finalist for Pulitzer Prize in Journalism and is a recipient of many awards for her coverage of faith and culture for Natural PBS TV, Religion and Ethics, News Weekly, a former staff writer for both the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. She was a contributing correspondent for Chicago Public Radio, and her articles appear in U.S. Catholic, and National Catholic Reporter. Judith is the author of 4 previous spirituality titles, including most recently, How to Live, What the Rule of St. Benedict Teaches Us About Happiness, Meaning, and Community. She is a lay associate of the Benedictine Monastery, Mount St. Scholastica in Atkinson, which is the subject of her 2013 memoir, Atkinson's Blue, A Search for Silence, a Spiritual Home, and Living Faith. As well, she's a sought-after speaker and retreat leader on living a more contemplative life and discovering inner wisdom through poetry. Learn more at judithvalente.com. Well, I'm really excited to have both of you on the show today, both Brother Paul and Judith. This is going to be so fun.
Thank you
I'm
for
pleased to be
having us.
here.
Well, so I'm really curious. So the book How to Be, it's actually, as I'm reading it, these are letters back and forth to you, and that is so unusual compared to what we're normally when we read a book. But here is actually we get to step into your personal thoughts and your feelings of what was going on in your life at that time, and also that friendship that developed just through the written word. I mean, how did all of that develop?
Well, I guess I'll take a crack at that because it was kind of my idea. Brother Paul and I had been corresponding for, well over 10 years. I met him because I interviewed him for PBS TV when I was covering religion and ethics, and we quickly connected on many different levels, but particularly a spiritual level. And we had been corresponding back and forth on a variety of topics. When to know, how do you know when to leave a job, and trouble with prayer and meditation and things like that. And I realized that, Brother Paul has so much wisdom from 60 plus years of living a contemplative life in a Trappist monastery that I wanted some way to be able to share that wisdom with other people. And so we decided we would collect some of the letters that had material that would be relevant to other people. And lo and behold, Hampton Roads Publishing was interested in putting out the book, and that's how it came to be.
And Brother Paul, what was your experience? I mean, you were, you met Judith, and then this relationship developed, and obviously your ability to be out and about. I mean, you're living a monastic life, and your ability to be out and about is very limited. So, what were your thoughts in regards to this letter exchange that was taking place?
Well, I think it was a wonderful opportunity to explore some areas of mutual interest. I knew that we had a kind of a kinship with regard to what we're really interested in, and this was an opportunity just to lay it out and see where it carries us. And
I obviously, in the modern world, we're stepping away from letters, and that's what I really loved about the book, is that it is the kind of how I grew up, the normal letters that we used to write. And we got all excited when we had a letter coming. I mean, now when you look at the inbox for email, there are 100 plus emails daily. And so that excitement isn't there anymore that we used to have. So what do you feel? And I'm curious, Judith, your thought. What are we losing moving away from that traditional letter writing?
Right. Brother Paul says something interesting about why we chose letter writing in the book. He says, emails are a way of passing on information, but they're not often a source of communion, where letters are really about communion with another person. And we wanted to sort of spark interest by publishing. I mean, we could have written a book without the letters. We could have just based our book on the information we exchanged on various topics. But we wanted to publish the letters to sort of spark interest in the almost dying or the almost dead art of letter writing, which has been an important part of faith tradition through the centuries, almost from the beginning of Christianity. If you think of the epistles of St. Paul, those were letters. And many of the great spiritual thinkers and writers of all the past centuries, they all wrote letters, and we have their thoughts in letters. And so we were also nodding to that important tradition within the context of faith.
And I mean, one of the Brother Paul, I mean, when you entered the monastery, one of your supervisors, his brother Thomas Merton, he was an avid writer at the time. And I mean, what was his experience? I mean, why did he feel such an urge, to write at the time?
Well, I think he was born to be a writer, and he was an exception with regard to the number of letters he would mail out per year, because the rule of the monastery was that we could only write 2 letters. 4 times a year, there was an open window to write letters, and you were supposed to restrict it to 2 letters. And so here's this, my novice master sending out a lot of letters, and that's because he had a unique charism as a writer, and people would write to him, and the courtesy is that you write back. And it was a bit of a headache for him, more than a bit. Sometimes it became overwhelming. That's my interpretation of his situation.
Well, Merton called his letter writing his apostolate of friendship, and so he considered it part of his ministry, almost as a Trappist monk. And that's what we try to encourage people when we do presentations on our book. We try to encourage them to begin their own apostolate of friendship through letter writing with a spiritual advisor or a trusted friend. we try to inspire people to take our example of letter writing and run with it.
And what I loved with the book is that it became very personal. I mean, when I'm there reading, I just feel it's almost like I feel the letters are written to me in a way, and that I'm part of that exchange. And I really love that personal. I really love that personal connection. That I got to step into that world.
We tried to choose subjects. Right. We tried to choose subjects to write about a little bit intentionally. We tried to think about the struggles that we have that other people have. Like, for example, conflicts at work. Brother Paul works at the monastery. He works as a cook in the kitchen. And I was having some conflicts in my work environment with the NPR affiliate that I was working at. And he told me about some of the conflicts that he goes through and how they get resolved. And so we tried to give practical information as well as there's a lot of, reflection on God and prayer and meditation in the book. But I think one theme that would really interest your listeners is this something that we talk a lot about in the book is the difference between being and doing, and how our culture is such a doing-oriented culture. And one of the things Brother Paul has taught me from his monastic life is the art of being, that it's okay to simply be. We don't have to be productive every single minute of the day. In fact, he often says to me, waste time, but waste it intentionally. Go outside and take a walk. Look around. I mean, in other words, don't burn yourself out. So I don't know, Brother Paul, if you'd like to elaborate on that, but that's one of your main themes.
Well, yeah, I think you stated it well. We're beloved creatures of God, and God likes to be with those he loves, and I love to be with the one who loves me. So that's basically what prayer and meditation is. And so once you're grounded in that, once that's become the focus and center of your life, then all the rest flows from that, but that always remains the center.
And the thing that Brother Paul talks about is that, we're loved by God. We don't have to earn that love. We're already loved by God. I always had this feeling that, I had to be the best at everything I undertook, and that's how I earned my keep in this life. And Brother Paul, taught me, no, that's not it at all.
I mean, you're nominated twice as a finalist, for the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, that says a lot about your drive, who you are.
Yeah, I call it my dual diagnosis of workaholism and overachieverism.
I love it. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Judith Valente and Brother Paul Quenon. They are the author of How to Be a Monk and a Journalist Reflect on Living and Dying, Purpose of Prayer, Forgiveness, and Friendship. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with our guest, Judith Valente. She has been twice nominated as a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and Brother Paul Quenon. So I'd love to kind of expand on the point, that the art of how to be. So most people, they come into life and they try to find their purpose. They try to find, who am I? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? And I know that you address that quite a bit in the book. I mean, Brother Paul, how do you respond to an individual that is in the middle of that search in their life?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience, and I say quite so. I have found my purpose. My purpose found me. And this is what you discover when you have a vocation, that you are called to do something, that behind that is someone who calls. And so when I was called to live a life in which I can love God more and live with God and in God, all of that was something that tugged on my heart and wanted me to, come to the monastery. And you could say, well, that's where I found my purpose. But really, it's something I received as a purpose.
Yeah.
And something Brother Paul taught me, too, is that our purpose can change over the course of our life, depending on that call from God. Sometimes our purpose changes, and, we think we need to be a doctor, and we need to be a doctor all of our lives. But maybe at some point we need to do something else. And certainly I found that's true in my own life, going from journalism to writing books and to, being a retreat leader. I mean, it wasn't a big leap, but it did represent a change in my calling over time. And so that was a kind of a freeing revelation that I received from Brother Paul, that, our calling can change over time as God wills it.
And I'd love to hear, and Judith, you were talking about how to be, and that was the message through the book. Obviously, the title of the book is How to Be, but how did you practically implement that into your life, into your busy life?
Yeah, it takes a lot of intention. I'll just give you. I think it'd be best if I give you a couple of examples. Brother Paul says, the world's not going to crumble because I'm not working 24/7 or 24 hours a day. The world's not going to crumble without me. And an example is I was invited to dinner over at a friend's house recently on a Sunday afternoon, and I brought my computer along because I write a column that I put out every Sunday. And I brought my computer along to finish up my column, and I pulled out my computer before we all sat down at the dinner table, and my friend's mother just looked at me, and she said, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just going to do a little work before we sit down at the table to eat. And she just looked at me strangely and said, it's Sunday. And so I just, I closed my computer laptop as unobtrusively as I could and put it away for the rest of the time we were at the meal for our friend's house. And lo and behold, when I got home, I still was able to finish my column. I still got it out on time. I didn't have to take that precious time away from being in communion with my friends and enjoying the meal that they had prepared for my husband and me. So that's the kind of thing that I think I need to do. A person who's very driven like myself needs to do. Another example, and I wrote about this in the book, was being so tired one day writing at my computer that my eyes were literally closing. My eyelids were just literally closing. And my normal response would be to keep on working, to just plow right through that fatigue. And instead, I just laid down on the couch and took a nap. And lo and behold, I still got done. I woke up from my nap refreshed, and I still got done what I needed to get done. But I didn't need to push myself to exhaustion, which I think is something that not only we in our American culture are encouraged to do, but we do it to ourselves. And Thomas Merton, who was a very productive guy in many ways, he said that is doing a form of violence to yourself when you don't listen to those cues that tell you, gee, this is time I need to be with my friends, or this is time I need to be with my family, or this is time I need to lay down on the couch and take a nap.
Yes, and that's where bad health comes from, over pushing yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And God gave us this body. I mean, this is a gift, and this every moment is a gift given, and it's our job to be stewards over that moment and make sure that we appreciate and treasure that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, Brother Paul, in regards to, because obviously you had to go through a learning journey as well in order to be able to be at that place, where you can just be, because I would assume that the silent life or the monastic life has its challenges as well in regards to being able to just how to be. What were some of the challenges that you went through in order to come to the place where you can feel more settled and more centered in that space?
Well, the monastic life is rather busy, actually. We have prayer 7 times a day, and so you have to be ready to interrupt what you're doing, which may be pretty interesting at the time, and just get up, respond to the bell, and get to church for the service. And that already gives you an attitude of detachment. I do what the community is doing, not what I'm engrossed in at the moment. And so that detachment is already kind of a freedom from compulsion. Of course, you're still occupied, but you're not just doing what your own will. You're not just doing what you happen to like at the time. That's a spiritual disposition, which is a kind of freedom already. But then the nice thing is that our life is structured in such a way that you have long stretches of time, an hour, half, or maybe even 4 hours in the afternoon, where you can, there's nothing to distract you from, reading or meditating or whatever. And then, of course, we have the grand silence, which, we get up at 3 o'clock and the first service is at 3:15. And then after that, there's no more lodges, not until 5:45. So you have a long period of time, and it's called the grand silence because nobody is to speak during that time. It's a very silent period, and it's very well kept. I mean, the community really observes that faithfully. And so you're not socializing. You're not thinking of, getting some message to somebody or other.
And what do you feel are the benefits?
Time, right?
Yeah.
So what do you feel are the benefits of that time and that silence? Because that's something that our modern society is lacking, is that we're always thinking we have to be busy and always there has to be something going on. I mean, what do you feel is the benefit?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, it sort of brings you back to yourself. I mean, not even the computer. Our web was closed during that time, up until 8 o'clock in the morning. So we, the idea is to live a life of prayer and to live in the presence of God, even though, you may be reading something. It's the best time for reading Scripture is that early period, or some kind of spiritual reading. And so all of that keeps you focused on, why you came to the monastery.
Yeah, love that. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Judith Valente and Brother Paul Quenon. They are the author of How to Be, a Monk and a Journalist Reflect on Living and Dying, Purpose of Prayer, Forgiveness, and Friendship. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Judith Valente and Brother Paul Quenon. They are the authors of How to Be. So, Judith, how do you, when you learn more and more in regards to, what takes place at the monastery, how they view things, like, for instance, the silent moment, how did you implement that in your life, and how did that affect your life? These pieces of information.
Right. I think that we can learn a lot from the monastic rhythm of life. People think of monasticism as a hopeless throwback to the past centuries. And I really see it as a window to a future we desperately need, in especially our American culture. This idea that Brother Paul referenced, he said they pray 7 times a day. Well, they pause 7 times a day. They're pausing to pray in a monastic context. But that idea of taking pauses within our days is something very simple we can do. When I was working full-time in journalism, starting out in print first and then broadcast, I had these terrible habits where I would just come in the morning and go, turn on my computer, go straight to work, get on the phone at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then suddenly I would look up at some point and it would be dark outside. I would look out the window and it would be dark. The day had passed and I missed it. I didn't stop. Sometimes I didn't even stop for lunch, or if I had lunch, I'd eat it at my desk instead of, going somewhere and properly sitting down and properly eating my lunch, slowly eating and enjoying my lunch. And these are very unhealthy habits that we get into and that are even encouraged often in our work environments. And I think, the aspect of monastic life is to show that, we need to take pauses. We need that for our mental health. We need it for our physical health. The monks have a definite time when they eat, and when it's time for them to eat, they sit down and they eat. They're not working. They're not writing. They're not talking on the phone or looking at the computer. They're eating when they're supposed to eat. And I think there's just some simple practices that we can adapt to our own lives. Try to get into some sort of a rhythm, to make taking pauses a habit, to make sitting down for our meals a habit. Sometimes even when I'm at home, now I work at home as a writing books, and sometimes I'll just stand up at the counter and eat my lunch. Well, that's not a great way to digest your food, just standing up and shoveling the food in your mouth. So I think there's little things that we could do that don't require us to live in a monastery or to go and visit an ashram, spend time in an ashram in India or anything. There's small little practices we can adapt. And that's, I think, another message of our book and something I learned from Brother Paul.
Yeah, I love that. And Brother Paul, when you think of monasteries, you think of isolation. It's sad to say. You think that you're kind of isolated. You're stuck in that in that community, and then with that, one of the within the title you talk about friendship. The importance of friendship. How do you develop friendship in that scenario where you are? It seems like you're more isolated, so you can then focus obviously on your relationship with God. But how do you develop friendship in that scenario?
Well, I think there's a kind of structured friendship. There's something almost inscribed in the way we live, the experience that we share together, the same formation, the same information that we get, pretty much the same kind of readings we do, at least as far as Scripture is concerned. And all of that, when I'm with another monk, there's a lot of stuff I don't have to explain.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that, the monastery, you may or may not have a friend in the monastery, because you come here to live, in a sense, a solitary life, which is not the same thing as an isolated life. Isolation means you're cut off.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's just that when you look from a person from the outside, not understanding. Yeah, and I agree with that fully.
But, if you're living a solitary life, you find union with other people in your union with God. And you know that there's at the core of it all, you have a great a unity that's given. And my best friends outside the monastery are the ones who I have a sense that they understand that there's something deep in at the core of their lives, which they grasp, and I grasp that it's there. I like to say I look for Christ in another person, and that gives the friendship its orientation, and it also keeps it from going off the tracks. And that may or may not be with a religious person. I have a good Jewish friend who's going to be coming on Sunday, and he's not a practicing Jew, but he's a very spiritual person, and he sees that in me, and I see that in him.
Yeah, and I, from my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong. It almost feels like when we're stuck in this busy life and we have so many different relationships, the quantity of the amount of relationships makes it so that we can't really have one deep relationship, one that we can really be present in. And because of that, we are then not really able to develop that connection with an individual because it becomes so superficial. But when you are more in that contemplative life where you don't have the same quantity, each one, the quality just becomes so much deeper.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that we have a stable life. Once you make your vows in the monastery, you stay here. Well, a lot of the friendships I've had, I don't have a very frequent contact with them. Maybe they'll come once a year or twice a year or something like that. But it's had an cumulative effect over some friendships I've had since the late 1970s. And that for them is as unique as it is for me.
Yeah.
Something Brother Paul once told me was interesting, that not all the monks in the monastery might be his close friend, but all of the monks in the monastery are his brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Love that. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Judith Valente and Brother Paul Quenon. They are the authors of How to Be, A Monk and a Journalist Reflect on Living and Dying, Purpose of Prayer, Forgiveness, and Friendship. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Judith Valente and Brother Paul Quenon. They are the authors of How to Be. Judith, how has your relationship with God changed through this exchange of letters?
Yeah. That's a really good question and kind of a deep question. I think the fact that Brother Paul was always accepting of me, because sometimes we can all be petty, we can all be angry, we can all be less than perfect, less than what we'd like to be. And I always felt totally accepted by Brother Paul, that there wasn't anything that I couldn't bring up to him in the letters. And I think that must be the way, it helps me to see the way that we are told that God loves us. God loves us with our flaws. Brother Paul earlier in the program said God loves to be with us. And that's a profound thought. Who feels worthy of that? I'd like to find the person who feels worthy of that, who has a big enough ego to feel worthy of God wanting to spend time with them. And yet, that sense of acceptance that Brother Paul gave to me helped me to accept myself, that I don't always have to be perfect. I just have to be human. There's a wonderful monastic saying that the spiritual life is this: I rise and I fall and I rise. And I think that just about sums up how we have to accept ourselves.
I love that. Do you have any additional comments about that, Brother Paul?
Oh, well, that was so beautiful. I don't want to spoil it by adding anything. But yeah, I mean, for me, a new relationship, for me, is always another exploration into, the world of God. And every relationship is different. Every friendship is unique, and not every relationship is a friendship. But and whatever it is, I think it's sort of a track into, well, the great love, which I intend to be immersing myself in.
And while being immersed, while you're immersing in that love, I mean, there's obviously we're all growing, and we're all connecting. Our connection with God and being one with God is something that we're all learning to do better and better. What are some of the kind of uncertainties that you went through this process, and that you communicated through the book in your exchange with Judith, that these are some of the things that I'm uncertain or I'm a little confused about while experiencing those events?
Well, I think I'm always uncertain. It seems to be a frame of mind that I live in. But at the same time, it's good to be confident that the uncertainties don't matter that much. Today I'm certain, and then tomorrow I'm uncertain. Emily Dickinson says that we believe and disbelieve 1,000 times a day, and that's what keeps believing nimble. And I can't say it's 1,000 times a day for me, but I think it's faith is not certainty, and it's good to know the difference, because we cling to certainty. Certainty is something you grab onto and you think you've got it all clear and nailed down. And I don't think that's the attitude of faith. An attitude of faith is that we walk in darkness. We see through a glass darkly. And to be comfortable with a mind that doesn't really know it all, or know what it thinks it knows, that it knows it all that clearly. Well, you would say maybe that's a kind of certainty I have, but yeah, I think you get my point.
Absolutely, yeah. The only certainty we have is that we're, as we're living by faith, we have to have a certain uncertainty in that process.
Yeah.
And one of the quotes, that I loved from one of the poems, I can't remember who was that wrote this question or the statement. It was, try to live the question. I'm not sure if it was Emily Dickinson.
Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean to Judith? What does that mean to you? Try to live the question.
Brother Paul put it pretty eloquently that, certainty can be kind of a danger. It can, when we're so certain of our faith and we're so certain we have the truth, the whole truth, and other people don't have the truth, that can be really divisive, and that could tear us from people. And I don't think that's what God asks of us or God expects of us. I think that, I think it's okay to live with a certain amount of uncertainty, because that's faith. I mean, faith is not the same as some kind of scientific experiment where you prove things to be. We can't prove that. We just had Easter. We can't prove that Jesus rose from the dead. We can't prove it. We believe it, but we can't prove it. And so I think that a certain amount, living with a certain amount of doubt is natural. Living with a certain amount of uncertainty is probably healthy, and it's probably less healthy to be going around with all your certainties and hammering other people over the head with them, as we often see, unfortunately, in with people of faith. And sometimes I'm sure I've been that way myself, but I try not to be.
And going along with that, we have the idea, or we as humans, we have the desire to be attached to things, to hold things, and can I grasp, and this is mine, don't take it away from me. And then, the importance then of that non-attachment, not being attached to things. I mean, how I would assume that relates also to that uncertainty, that we need to kind of allow things to flow and not be attached. And then also along with that, obviously, comes the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, Brother Paul, you've talked about how you've changed over the course of your monastic life. That your first 10 years you felt one way, and then your second 10 years you felt another way.
Yeah, my first 10 years I thought I was not good enough for the monastery, and then the second 10 years the monastery is not good enough for me. And finally I gotten to the point where, why make a judgment about it one way or the other?
Yeah, why can't I just be? I don't have to decide it.
Yeah, and I certainly hope the faith that I have at my age now is not the same faith I had as a teenager or as a 20-year-old or 30-year-old, maybe even as a 40-year-old. I hope that our faith grows and evolves over time and doesn't stay static.
And one of the things that we were attached to, obviously, is life. And then you have the fear. A lot of people are dealing with the fear of death, or the fear of the loss of life. I mean, what is a monastic view on death and the end of life, and also how do you sorrow associated when you lose somebody, like losing your Brother Thomas Merton? I mean, how do you experience all of that?
Well, when Merton died, I was exhilarated. He came to the end. He got to the goal. He actually made it. And I think most monks, we live in the presence of death. I mean, that's part of reality. And it's not something you avoid. In a way, you died to the world when you came here. A huge change. And, death should be, it's the final change. It's such a drastic change. We really, we deceive ourselves by imagining there's a continuation of what we have already. Well, that's where faith comes in. You really don't know what comes next. We talked about that in the book. And it's important to keep that openness. I think openness is the attitude of faith, and let happen what will happen.
Yeah, I love that.
I like Brother's idea of, you enter into sort of a totality that we can't access in our earthly lives. He talks about that in the book as well. Of entering a totality where past, present, and future are all one. Am I right, brother?
Oh, yes.
Wonderful. Before we close, any other kind of points that you feel for our listeners that this is a gold nugget in the book, and we're really glad that we were able to bring this forth to the world? Is there any of those points that you feel should be shared?
Well, I think it's very important to remember that being is a gift. I mean, I don't just kind of be as a neutral thing, but to realize that the fact that I am is pretty amazing. And a lot of people don't even think of that. But just that reality is something to be grateful for, and that's the beginning of prayer. Judith?
Well, that was beautiful, Brother Paul. I don't think I could add anything to that except to be appreciative of this great gift of life, and to know that you were put here for love. You were put here for love and to be loved. And I think if we go about our days with that in mind, we'll have a happier world and a better world.
Mm-hmm.
And Brother Paul, I loved, you just made the statement, to be, and that is the beginning of prayer. Do you mind just explaining that a little bit?
Well, and that's the simplest kind of prayer. Prayer should actually come pretty easily. Prayer should be as easy as breathing. And in fact, if you breathe well, you'll pray better as well. And so it's a very simple thing. And that's what meditation is. It's just to come back to that simplicity and to abide in that simplicity. And, the reality is so immediate that we don't see it for what it is. And so you have to come back to that immediacy, and that, and don't get, it's just so easy to get pulled away. And sometimes it's pretty hard to stay there, too. But at least you got something that you're returning to over and over. Yeah,
I love that. Well, I so appreciate both of you being on the show, and I really loved the book. I mean, it was a wonderful book. It was just one of those that, you can just sink into that relationship and to the wisdom, the exchange that both of you had, through the letters. And I agree. I think that traditional letters is really a lost art, and we going back to that allows us. It's a step towards slowing down and to deepen relationships and deepen our thoughts and in the actions that we're doing. So I thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing this information.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. That is it for today. Listening to Health Made Radio. Remember, check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. 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 What you make it.